Okay. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Sure. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's good. So you go first, and if I have any clarifying questions, I could stop you in the slide presentation. I could ask you. If not, you run through your slides all the way, and then okay, so after you finish your slides, I present mine, or do we discuss yours first? Oh, I present mine. Okay, right. Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. All right. Sure. Um, no, nothing. I think I'm good. Um, yeah. Okay. Right.
Well, hello, everyone. Wow, that was not at all a very, like, I didn't fade out the chat at all in that case. So, hi, everyone. It is Kristi. Welcome back to my channel. And normally I've done a lot of social science things, and we've talked here on the channel about ontology, epistemology, and I'm excited tonight to be back to have a nerdy conversation about nerdy things with someone who reached out to me to ask for like a better understanding of this, like my social constructionist perspective. And so I'd like to introduce everybody to John Russell. John, if you'd like to say hellos to the people and tell us what you feel comfortable telling us about yourself.
Um, Hello, hi everyone. First, I'd like to thank Kristi for hosting this and inviting me to discuss social constructionism. Thank you, Kristi.
Sure.
A little about myself. A little about myself. I'm John Russell from South India. I was born and raised here. I teach math and physics at the high school level. I also teach a little bit of music. And philosophy is a hobby of mine. I have no formal degrees related to what I'm here to discuss. So if there are any misinterpretations of ideas and concepts, yep, you'll have to please bear with me. And this is my first YouTube appearance, so looking forward to it.
Very honored. Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
All right. So the way we've discussed this tonight is that because he had asked me about my views and they were a little, so I'm going to explain myself. We've been going back and forth for what, like 2.5 weeks now, at least since my summer school classes. So, but we've done it in like little bits and pieces, and it's been very difficult. So we finally did organize for an actual like chat, and so what we are going to discuss tonight is our perceptions, because none of us claim, I don't think, any ultimate truth, but how we understand, like, well, I put mine as the role of mind and also our reality and how these two things interact, I'll just say. Now, we both have PowerPoint presentations because we're nerds. Also, I'm sure because we think in an organized way, we want to make sure we cover our points and we express ourselves clearly. I will be going first, and then without any questions except for clarifying questions, Jean will go next. And then after that, we'll have a round of, a block of time for questions. So since I presented first, John will be able to ask me any quick clarifying questions, any other deeper questions, challenging questions, whatever else. And we'll say, let's go for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, we can either like renew for another up to 5 minutes or swap over. And then same thing, I will be able to ask him questions and we can have a conversation for like 5 minutes based on his presentation. And then we can go back if we want to, or we can extend it to another 10 minutes and back and forth. And I think by that point, we'll probably be close to an hour. At least that's kind of how these things have gone in the past. So in addition to giving the presentation and running the live stream, I also have to organize the visuals. So at the moment, I'm hoping this is going to work all right. I think, yep, if I transition the screen, it's not working. Why is it not working? I had my PowerPoint all ready to go, and now it's not working. My chat PowerPoint. Hold on a second. Is it in the right window? Ah, that would help. Okay, I think you should see it on the screen now. Apparently I have to open up the window for it to be seen. So, John, can you just verify quickly for me that you see my purple presentation on the screen?
Not yet, actually.
Okay. All right. Let me check.
Yeah, there.
All right. All right. Okay. Yeah, this is on a completely different part of my computer, so please be patient with me as I try to. Okay. So.
Sure.
All right. Yeah, so I want to, I guess, stay up front that I work in quantitative social science and qualitative social science. So for part of my job, I have to think about all of these external exogenous factors that exist separately from mine, but also impact people in generally the same way, enough of a same way that we can measure it on a 10-point scale or a 5-point scale and make assumptions that the steps between the various scores in the beta or the explanatory coefficient are the same. So I understand the principles of the ontology that you're probably more sympathetic to, John. But the deeper I got into philosophy and looking at how people speak and talk about things, how we value things, what we give significance to and not, really does shape, especially as a political scientist, people's social realities way more than mathematics. But I'm not dissing on maths, but I'm just saying that values are very important in how we understand our reality. Now, hold on a second. I see that the slide needs to be slightly adjusted in order for you to see the thing. Let me just do that on the fly. Bam. Okay. So before I start, I always think it's good to give people a map of what, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them, or tell them and then tell them what you told them. So the TLDR, if you want to go somewhere else after this, is the following. Reality as it exists beyond, before human beings, without an observer, the reality is ineffable. There isn't language to describe reality as it exists in itself. And that is kind of where the starting point of my philosophical perspective. And then I'm going to talk about the role of brains in minds. So in how what we perceive about the world is shaped by our brains before we even, it doesn't come in neutrally. It is shaped by our brains. And that based on this, we create a model of the universe. The problem comes, and that's fine because the model generally works pretty well. We survived as a species, so it's okay. But I'm going to tell a story about the finger in the moon, and sometimes about not mistaking one thing for another. After we have sensory perception, concepts, pattern seeking, whatever else that our brains are pre-organizing the world for us, then we have to come on to the role of language and the way in which language is not neutral. It's actually quite value-laden in most cases. And that we learn about the world, not only the physical world, but the social world and other people through this language, which already has values in it. And we learn about values and other things about what is proper and not through this constructed language, through these constructed norms of what is appropriate and not. And so at the end of the day, our knowledge about the empirical world is socially constructed. Our social reality is socially constructed. And things that we are perceiving, we know aren't the truth or perfect because they're open to change. And so in this way, I think that our experience of reality is highly socially constructed, even if grounded in an independent external reality. So I'm going to go through that a little more slowly now because that might have been a lot. Next. Yeah. Reality as the ineffable. I couldn't come up with a better word, and in many ways, just giving a word to the ineffable itself tries to contain it. But by the ineffable, I mean all the levels of, or the modes of existence that we can't even fathom. I mean, we know now because of technology and science that we've created to help us solve problems that we've identified in terms of our gaps in our knowledge, that, there's a much bigger world out there. But so we know parts of it. We know that there are like little tiny things that are going through our bodies all the time. There are gravitational waves probably in the universe. There's the atomic level of existence. There's the quantum level of existence. There's time. There's space. There's, like so many things that we don't even know yet. And that totality is, I would call it the ineffable, because there just aren't words to express reality as it actually exists, not the way that we perceive it outside of our existence. So, next. Okay, so boom, human beings with our monkey brains, we are on this planet. And because of the nature of what temperatures we have here and gravitational pulls and all other kinds of physical forces, we occupy a certain slice of that reality. And by that, I mean, that's the part of it we can perceive with our senses, even with tools. But it is a very small slice of reality. And that there's a preset thing that our brains do. We have pattern recognition. We think that it looks like color exists in the world, but actually color is our brains interpreting frequencies. So there isn't color in a thing. We perceive the color as the whole process of reflective waves of light and all that. And so we don't even necessarily, or we haven't until modern science, even understood that was what was happening to our brains. We're very, like how our brains are functioning. So with this sensory information that's coming into our brains, we create a model of our slice of reality. And that is the reality that is sort of, that we feel that we're living in and exists. But our model is incomplete and it's filled with errors. Some are unimportant errors and some are really big errors, but it is not a perfect representation. It is not a direct perception of an objective truth that is unmediated. It's a model based on our sensory perceptions. And this is where things can get a little bit subtle. So there's a story in Buddhism about a teacher who is advising the student who is becoming very, very focused on the text and the words and the specific order and the way that it's presented. And the teacher explains to the student that the teachings of the Buddha are the finger pointing to the moon. And the moon is enlightenment. But you're mistaking the finger for the moon. And I feel that that story really encapsulates well the mistake that we make when we mistake our model of our sensory perceptions of the universe or of reality as reality. We go with the step of thinking that our perceptions are an accurate reflection rather than understanding that our brains are pre-organizing it and our language is filtering it. Right? So, and the other thing is that our models aren't all the same. Different people have like someone who's colorblind is going to have a different experience of a frequency, and they change all the time depending on knowledge we get from other people. So our model isn't a perception of reality. It's an imperfect attempt to model the world that we inhabit. So now the very, very important role of language, which oftentimes has gone unreflected or is not put forward as a filter through which we operate in the world. Again, it's kind of invisible, like that step between the finger of the moon. So if we had a person and we just plop them down, a person who has no knowledge of society, no knowledge, no language, right? And we're going to drop them on a very comfortable desert island with plenty of food and everything else. They could exist and they could figure out their model of the world and what they can eat and how to sleep comfortably and everything else. But without another person, they're not really going to interact with the world in a social way. It's a more of a physical, direct experience. When we have another person, now we can start to communicate with each other about our experiences and triangulate them. or share them or indoctrinate them. Human beings do a lot of messed up stuff. But the idea here is that knowledge, understanding, language are all socially constructed because, as many philosophers will tell you, our sensory perceptions alone are insufficient as evidence of something in the real world. If I looked out into my empty street right now and I saw a zebra, I mean, I would, well, okay, now I could take a picture of it on my phone to see if it showed up on my phone. But back before we had mobile phones and mobile cameras so readily available, I would have to ask someone, do you see that zebra in the street? Just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. And this is how knowledge is co-constructed. We need other people to triangulate their experiences to ours. And so knowledge is necessarily socially constructed. Knowledge is built from language, and language is a series of sounds that we assign to a concept that we have in our minds and we give a definition to. And those things are, what do I have here? Oh, yes. And if we don't name something, we can't see it. It might exist right in front of our eyes, but without a name for it, without a category for it, we can't interact with it in a meaningful way. We have to name something in order for it to come into our existence, into our model of reality. And the naming act can and often does include values. So values are not given to us by nature. Values are constructed by human beings. What we think is good collectively, what we think is bad collectively, except you. And these are not universal. They've changed over time. They change across social societies. So two groups can have a similar thing, like let's say a tree in front of them, and yet by their definitions, they can assign that object with very different values. So let's just do like a hypothetical. One society says a tree is a thing with leaves and branches and bark and pulp and roots and whatnot. It's sort of like it's an atomistic way. It's an individualistic, or as it were, like we're isolating the tree, and that is their notion of tree. And then let's say that there's a second society, and when they define tree as the water that goes from the earth into the tree. It talks, the leaves that fall down and nourish the ground underneath it. It can be the animals and the birds living in the tree. It can be, so the tree is not just an object, it's part of a process. It's part of a larger concept of life and how things exist and the interdependencies of things in nature. So in these two societies, the idea of, raising an entire forest will probably have two different value associations with them, because one has an implication for the larger embedded impact that would have beyond the tree itself, and the other people just see a tree. So that's like an example of the way that we can bring values into our language, even if it doesn't look like we're bringing values in. And human values are not part of nature. We socially construct values, and what we value changes over time. Infanticide was widely accepted in the ancient world. It is not now. And so we can definitely say that human morality it's a moving target in terms of where society is at any given time. So we're getting close to the end here. This actually may be, yes, my final slide. So grounding social construction. To wrap up, my argument is that what we create in our minds, in our pools of knowledge, we share a model of the small slice of reality that we can experience, and also any parts of it we can create tools to get at in order to understand it. But that model is not the moon. It's not the reality. It's our model of it. And it was only by people socially constructing language that was generally value-laden, and developing pools of knowledge. And pools of knowledge can be art, they can be culture, they can be customs, they can be traditions, they can be religion, whatever you call it, say what knowledge is. But within a society, right, people construct language and they develop these clusters of understanding in different areas. And that is how we have operated to understand the part of the ineffable that we occupy. And I haven't really even talked about social reality, but social reality is really based on human values, not anything found outside of the human mind. So social reality, I should say, is arguably more influential. At least I think it's more influential on the quality of people's lives, but that's kind of beside the point. So, in conclusion, socially constructed languages or values are a fabric, in my understanding, through which we perceive and interact with our world. And whether or not we understand that we are, like going through that fabric, we're seeing everything through that fabric is sort of irrelevant to the fact that that's kind of how it works. All right, so that's me done. And now I have to do the fun thing where I switch to a different slide. So are you all set? About ready to go, John? I'll just make sure I have the right.
Yes, I'm all set.
Okay, let me hide my slide. Nope, not the paint. Windows capture. All right. I will also do it in view mode so that you've got the full screen there. Slideshow. Okay, let's see. You can see that all right?
It's probably going to take a couple of seconds.
Yes. So that's the other thing too is when you say next, it will be lagged on the screen. So yes, maybe give me a little next when you think you're coming up to it, or when you kind of reach. Yeah, when you're yes. But we'll wig it.
Sure.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, it's up now. Yeah, I can see
Okay,
it.
I'm also going to mute myself just to make sure that any background noise doesn't interfere with your presentation.
Sure. Sure. All right. A while ago, I came upon Kristi's video titled "Correcting Richard Dawkins: Science is a Social Construct." And after watching the video, I wrote her explaining why I think Richard Dawkins isn't wrong, and why I think science isn't a social construct. I mean, the thing is, Richard Dawkins had said science isn't a social construct, so I was basically agreeing with him. So we've made each other back and forth for a couple of weeks, like you said, and then now we're here to discuss it. So what intrigued me the most is in the video I just mentioned, Kristi says math is a social construct as well. And in another video, Kristi is asked by one of the audience members if she's come across something that's not a social construct. Um, and she says the short answer is no, which led me to believe, presumably, that she'd say basic moral rules are social constructs as well. Yeah, I'm just gonna want to talk about science, math, and morals, and understand Christie's views on them and why they are social constructs. All right, so let's go to the next slide.
I have clicked it.
Right. Right. So I'd like to start with some definitions first. So the Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines social construct as an idea that's been created and accepted by people in the society. And at the bottom, I've also included Christie's description that she uses in one of her videos. So I'd like to focus on the last couple of lines here. It says a social phenomenon or convention originating within and cultivated by society or a particular group, as opposed to existing inherently or naturally. On the next slide, using this definition, we will see some examples of social constructs.
Sorry, did you say next? I was okay. My apologies. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So the next slide has some examples of social constructs. I think these shouldn't be controversial. We'd have race, gender roles, borders of countries, passports, and a few other things. So probably we should look at a couple of them in a little more detail. So skin color is certainly biological, but race is a little more complex. The usual and very valid example one hears is this. We say Obama is the first black president of the United States, and along with that, we also hold, and correctly, that his father's black and his mother's white, which means we could say Obama is as black as he is white, or the other way around. I mean, we could have it either way we like. And there used to be the one drop rule and so forth. So that non-biological aspect of race, I would say, is certainly a social construct. And we can take money as the next example. So the currency that we use, the value that we assign to that piece of paper, simply because of the numbers printed on it, that's definitely a social construct. Social constructs are basically ideas, beliefs, and practices that are society dependent, and they're made true by the collective will of the people. which also means they could be changed by the collective will. And well, if there's a dictator, then obviously it can be changed by mere fiat as well. Next slide, please. So on the next slide, we have my position. So my position is that of scientific, mathematical, and moral realism. What this means fundamentally is that these things are not subjective and we can't change them at will because they're about objective reality. They're outside our minds, over which none of us have any say at all. Um, Science, math, and morality, I would say, while they do have a social dimension, uh, we aren't justified in saying that they're social constructs, and this is because it's just a thin layer on top of each of these that are socially constructed. But at their core, they're not socially constructed. At least that's my claim. Next slide, please. So the next few slides, we'll look at each of these three and their uh, thin socially constructed layers as well. Um, so first we'll talk about science. And science, I would say, is about discovering laws that govern the universe. It's about describing the natural world and predicting events in it. So we have the natural world, which is the physical stuff, and this physical stuff has properties. And when physical stuff interact with each other, they do so obeying certain fixed laws. Science is about discovering these fixed natural laws and also facts about the physical world. So I don't see how that part can be a social construct. I've listed some thin. I've listed some parts of the thin socially constructed layer on the side. Classification is a good example. So, for instance, if we consider electromagnetic spectrum, on the higher end we have gamma rays and X rays, and right down at the lower end we have microwaves and radio waves, and in the middle we have the visible spectrum. That's the colors that we see. Now, if we did have abilities to see other parts of the spectrum, clearly the classification would have been different. Probably aliens, if they exist, they're probably doing it differently. Then there are other things that are socially constructed, obviously, like who gets the credit. About credit, one could rightly say that somebody like James Clerk Maxwell, his work was comparable by all accounts to that of Einstein and Newton, but obviously every school child knows Einstein and Newton, but and the layman as well, right? But James Clerk Maxwell is not very well known. So who gets credit? That's socially constructed. And then what gets studied? So I would say, for instance, if elected representatives think that stem cell research is immoral because it involves destroying fertilized eggs and that's equivalent to killing babies, then probably stem cell research is not going to happen in that society. Right. Next slide. So the next slide is about math. And math is about mind independent abstract objects. It's about properties of these abstract objects and relationships between them. Math is about necessary truths, it's not about contingent truths. And here again, I'm not sure how this could be a social construct. But this has some thin top layers which are socially constructed. Kristi rightly points out in one of her videos that we use base 10 right now, for instance, and while other cultures have used different bases in the past. So that part of math is definitely socially constructed. Then we could talk about branches of math that are emphasized. So generally across the world, at least in my view, geometry, algebra, and calculus are way more emphasized than, say, probability and statistics. That's true at least at the high school level. So that's a social construct. Then metaphysical backdrop. So the claim here is that certain aspects of calculus come from Platonism and Christian metaphysics, and that calculus can and should be done with no reference to limits. Math students here would remember that they are taught limits before being taught derivatives and integrals. So anyway, that's the claim that math has a metaphysical, at least this part of math has a metaphysical backdrop. And if it's true, then I would say that part of, I mean, that part is a socially constructed part as well. Next slide. So it's the same with science. For math, it's like who gets the credit and how the results are used and those things. the next slide is about morality. At its core, morality is about distinguishing right and wrong motives and actions. I want to make a distinction here. The claim is not that every moral problem has a neat solution and somehow we can discover it. That's not the claim. The claim is that at least some actions are objectively immoral without question, or at least given a certain situation, some actions are objectively immoral. For example, the statement "rape is morally wrong" is true, and it would be true even if the universe had never existed. And I say that because we can recast the claim that rape is morally wrong as a counterfactual conditional statement. And it might go something like this. If there are two sentient beings capable of reasoning beyond their mere instincts, then it would be morally wrong of the stronger of the two to overpower the weaker. Now that we've made the statement like this will hold true. I claim that it would hold true even if the universe had never existed. And I also claim that a person who disagrees with this is as wrong as a person who claims that number 10 is, the number 10 is a prime number. I mean, I'm just comparing, how one can get morals wrong just as objectively and clearly as one can get math claims wrong. And also, if we think about it, we find that we have more faith in the truth of the above statement, that's the statement that rape is morally wrong, than we do about certain assumptions of science. For instance, we assume that the laws of physics are the same everywhere in the universe. So, in light of that, if we consider these two statements, let's say statement one is the speed of light is the same on the moon as it is on Earth, and statement two says rape is morally wrong. And I claim that we have more reasons in favor of the second statement, that rape is morally wrong, than the first one. So, such basic moral truths I don't think are socially constructed. I can't see how they can be. Um, Taking a different example, even if the Nazis had won the war and had convinced everyone that killing Jews was a great thing, what would that mean exactly? It would just mean that we are somehow convinced that killing Jews was a great thing, not that we would be right about it at all. In fact, again, we would be as wrong about it as a person who claims 10 is the prime number. So in that sense, morality is objective. It's not a social construct. There are some thin layers, obviously, here as well. So what's considered selfish and modest that could change from culture to culture, or even from generation to generation within the same culture. But it would still be true that being unselfish is better than being selfish, or being modest is better than being immodest. Right? Next slide. So on the next slide, there's a couple of other illustrations that I'd like to give. So the first one is about the road rules. So in India, here we drive on the left, and in the US, people drive on the right, and obviously that depends on the society. That's definitely a thin socially constructed layer. But if you think about it, the underlying reasons for these rules aren't really socially constructed. For instance, we think that human life is valuable. I would say that's not a social construct. Then there's biology. If we had skins as thick as rhinos, for instance, obviously the speed limits would be different. Then there are the physical laws that dictate the result of an accident. That's to do with transfer of momentum, stuff about kinetic energy and other things. Then that's definitely not socially constructed. So at its core, road rules are a combination of mind-independent moral values, our biology, and immutable physical laws. And of course, it has a thin socially constructed layer on top. The other example is about money. So currency and the worth of the piece of paper, that's the socially constructed layer. But some principles that lie underneath the circulation of money aren't socially constructed. For example, we ought to honor a person's labor by paying them what they're due. That's a moral principle that's not socially constructed. Now, whether we act in accordance with this principle or not is not the point. The point is that the principle in itself is not a social construct. Next slide. So next slide, I have some concluding thoughts. I would say that very few things are social constructions at their core, but almost everything has a social dimension because, after all, we are social beings. The next thing is to decide whether one agrees or disagrees with what I've said so far. one has to use mind independent, society independent standards. And what I mean by that is if two people are debating, neither of them can pull a gun out and shoot the other person and say they've won the debate or something. I mean, it just can't be that way. And if a society runs that way, then we would say that the society is objectively wrong in that aspect. It's not the case that each society could decide for itself as to how debates are adjudicated and somehow all, I mean, if they come to different conclusions, then somehow all are equally valid. That's not the case. The third point here, I would say, is the central idea. It seems as though we're always reaching out to some external standards that we somehow know to be true and yet didn't invent or construct. This is true in maths, in science, and in morals, and many other aspects of life as well. And hence, it would be incorrect to say these are social constructs. And as a contrast, we hardly ever talk about standards external to humankind when it comes to fashion and clothes, right? So there's obviously a difference between math, science, and morals and one end, and fashion and clothes on the other. And at the end, if we claim that everything is socially constructed, I would like to ask if that statement itself is a product of social constructionism. If it was, then I would say there's a contradiction there because it could change depending on the collective will of the people. So I would say that's a self contradiction. And the next slide. So next slide is a graph that summarizes what I've said so far.
Sorry, did you want me to go forward again?
Sorry,
Okay.
the last slide.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
there we have it. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
So to end with, yeah, there's a graph here. So on the vertical axis, we have dependence on society or culture, and on the horizontal axis, I've put logic, math, basic morality, and science on the left end, and then on the other side, um, we have law, cuisine, and fashion. So the claim is that the claim isn't that these two are distinct bunches with nothing in common. No, that's not the claim. I do agree that it's a spectrum, which is why it's a curve and not a like a stepwise function. Math students would know what that is. Uh, but the two bunches differ enough from the point of view of social constructionism that we aren't justified in saying that the things on the left are social constructs. So that's that's it. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Kristi. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, and I went forward too fast. I went back, but yes. And thank you for
That's okay.
your talk and also all the time and effort that you put into this. Before we move on to my
My
questions,
pleasure.
yeah, before we move on to you asking me questions, is it okay if I refer back to your slides when we have your questions? Because you've got them very neatly ordered.
Yes,
And
sure,
okay, and I can
sure.
make mine
Yeah.
available to you as well if you'd like. But otherwise, I kind of want to have the vibe of a chat in a pub. Like we can like
Okay.
so yeah we can just because like I said, I'm not here to convince you or to like have you convince me. It's more about like two reasonable people can have different perspectives. So let me put on.
Right. Yeah.
Do you want to see my slides at all? Do you need them for in any way?
I've taken some notes, so I don't
Okay.
think so.
Okay. So then what I can do is hide that, unhide that, and then people can look at pretty things getting painted while we chat. Yeah, so we'll go. I'll try to keep it to 5 minutes. 5 minutes would make it 42. I'll try to keep an eye on the time. But yeah, what are your questions?
Right. So I have about 5 or 6 questions written down here. Probably I'll start with this. So you spoke about color, right? You said that, well, obviously I agree with that. The color is not present in the substance that we're viewing, but well, something happens in our brain, and that's how we perceive color. But well, that's true. But then why couldn't we use, say, a spectrometer or a spectrum analyzer, and that could tell us what the frequency is? I probably think what you meant that can't be communicated. That's the qualia part, right? People talk about qualia, which is the feeling of experiencing something. It's like even if you've explained everything about colors and frequencies in a rainbow, right? So the experience of viewing it is definitely completely different, and you do learn something new. That part we call the qualia. So that part I agree. You
Uh,
cannot get that out of science.
well, insofar
But
as like, if I could just really quick, even when NASA
mhm,
does deep space photos, and they show us these
mhm,
amazing clouds of varying spectrum of color, and it's misty and
yeah,
deep, that's not how it
mhm,
looks.
true,
They
yeah, that's
right.
true.
So NASA has a system where they translate frequencies into things that that are colors within
Mhm,
the visible spectrum we have. So yeah, we know.
yeah,
So knowing something exists isn't quite the same as perceiving it, because we know it's yeah, it's not part of our direct reality. It's more like a thing. Well, it's not even a thing we know about. We believe someone who told us that this is a thing. So there's like we're usually relying on an expert who's giving us interpretation of what they've observed. And so that model that we build up in our heads is what I say is our experience. This is how we experience reality. It is through through a model that our brains create. But again, it's like the finger in the moon. Or another example would be the allegory of the cave, where people are seeing shadows on the wall, but they don't see the world, the whole totality of the whole world behind them that's creating the shadows. And so they understand they're part of the reality, and they think that's reality. They think they're perceiving reality, but reality is so much bigger than they are. And we're mistaking that model in our brains for the actual thing. So that's what I mean when I
uh,
say like the ways that color exists beyond ways that we can perceive it.
true. But would you then think that a colorblind person wouldn't make a good physicist? Because, well, I don't think what difference would it would make, right? I look at something, I call it red. Maybe most people agree with me, but a colorblind person doesn't. But then both of us bring our instruments and we can measure the frequency. We don't need to
Yeah,
speak in terms of
agreed. I mean,
red or blue.
there are ways that we interact and we've organized the world, but again, that's our
Mhm.
model of it. Like watching a movie isn't the same as being on the set and watching the actors.
Sure, but
There's a lot of things you're not seeing. There's a lot of stuff that's beyond your reach or beyond your understanding or view. You're seeing a representation, and that's kind of how again from my perspective, we're operating within this working models of our brains. And of course, a person who is colorblind can be a physicist because I believe in reasonable accommodation for people with various disabilities. So that's not the issue so much as even our senses aren't identical so that we know that we're getting an identical representation as of everyone else. We have to always talk to other people and consult other people's experiences in order to understand our reality.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, probably that leads to the next question. So, at one point in your slide, it seemed that you said something like, or at least what can be deduced from it is, just because we don't work alone, that we have to, have a community, peer review, and other things. Is that why you would say science is a social construct? Because I would say that's just working together. We collaborate with others, but I wouldn't use the term social construct for it,
You
like I
know,
would use with fashion and
yeah,
clothes
actually,
and cuisine and other things. So,
I'm sitting on your side about slide about science because it was one of my first questions. Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
science is a social construct because science as a is a process, right? It's not a thing. It's not a physical object, right? And so it being a process, that means that people one like have to agree on the steps of the process and then adhere to them, and then replicate them with other people. So there's a whole lot of things about okay, what do we value in this? We value accuracy, we value replication, we value reproducibility, we value transparency. These are all values, right? And so those are the things that sit at
True, but
at the basis of science, our values. And then the question becomes,
yes,
what steps do we need to take in order to achieve these values? And that's also a process upon which a community must agree. And like why is statistical oops why is statistical significance 0.05 0.01 and 0.001? Well, I mean, it's not written in stone anywhere. Some people will use point one. I mean, you kind of throw those results to the side, but that entire process of what is significant and what isn't found in nature. We decided on that convention, and that convention becomes a rule because that's what you need to do to get published, and so it becomes like just a standard of the community. But that was a choice. Now, in the social sciences, I can get away with 0.05. In the medical sciences, they can't. Right, when you're doing those kinds of experiments, you need p equals less than 0.001 because we're dealing with human lives, which are much more important to get right than people's attitude on a poll. All of this is value laden. All of these are steps that we take in order to keep to those values, and other people judge us on how well or not we adhere to those steps. And all of that is just between people. So I don't see science as a thing. In my view, science is a process that people engage in together, which makes it a socially constructed thing.
Okay, but wouldn't you like your p-values to be that low as well?
Oh, no,
If it's
look,
not
I think that the point there is that my value is a bad model with high statistical significance is not worth anything because it won't tell you things accurately about the world. And then so we need to tolerate some error because of sampling, random sampling and other things in there. But the convention is a convention. If it was 0.01, we would have fewer things to say because way fewer things would be statistically significant. And if it was
right.
0.01, well, then we'd have a lot more confounding variables perhaps. So I mean, again, it depends on the discipline. Medicine is different from the social sciences, and that all comes down
True.
to
I
values.
agree with right. I agree with that. But I would first of all say the values that you listed, like accuracy and replicability, predictability, and so on. I would say those values are written in stone. It's not that you can find a society which says we don't at all care about accuracy, and that's how they go about their life.
Yeah,
It's not possible,
but
right?
now, but we didn't have that commitment until the emergence of modern sort of empiricism and scientific thinking. Before that, people were perfectly
Really?
happy. Yeah,
Do
you
you
had
really think people before that would have been happy with being, or would have actually wanted things to be inaccurate, just like how we want
Well,
things to be
people at
accurate?
that point, the worldview was, supernatural powers were behind things. God made the world. God put the stars in the sky. God did everything. That was their explanation,
Mhm.
right? And so science only came, there's no external thing to look to. The only thing you look to is what humans value, right?
Man is the measure of all things, you mean,
No, I'm
basically.
saying that when it
Uh,
comes to what the scientific process looks like, was determined by people.
okay, all right.
And
Yeah, I
so,
think
in
that's
my
a
mind, then it's socially constructed because they have to come together to agree the language, the standards, and the practices. And that's only a human
mhm.
activity.
Okay. I would say that's a fundamental disagreement that we have there. And okay, and before before you can ask me questions, I just have one more here
Yeah, yeah,
about
because
infanticide,
oh, yeah, I've gone. Okay,
which
yeah, we got the last question because it was 42 and we're already at
yeah,
46.
right. Yeah, yeah. So about infanticide, do you really think that the Greeks and the Romans left their babies out in the harsh weather to die, and that's all there is you would want to say about it? Wouldn't you want to say that's objectively wrong, and since we don't do that now, we are objectively better?
Well, I
I mean,
actually,
you must believe in moral progress, don't you? At least in this particular instance, because the moment you believe in moral progress, you're not. I mean, you already have a scale by which you. I mean, it's a gradation then, right? You already have a scale that you can grade things. Uh, because if you don't, then you would just have to say that there's moral change, but not moral progress. Don't you?
okay, tell you what, in the interest of time, because I have a question for
Mhm.
you on like rape being
Sure.
universally wrong. So
Yeah.
that's very much a similar topic.
Right.
So why don't we flip it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, then now I have to do some things with window capture. That was the one. And paint gone. Yes. All right. So let's get back to science because that and then the moral one. We were both kind of on the same page with this because I think
Hmm.
we agree on a lot. We just disagree on where the line of social constructionism ends. So I think like
Sure. Yeah. I probably think there's much less social constructionism that than you seem to think
yes,
there is, right? I think that's the difference. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. So it, on your thing about science, When you say
Mhm.
something, okay, do you think science is mind independent?
But science is a process, so obviously, like I said, there will be a degree of social constructionism in it. But
Uh-huh.
well, let's take a statement like this, right? Let's say the distance from the Earth to the Moon is greater than 10,000 miles, right? That's a statement that's true, and it was discovered to be true by science. And once we have this statement, I don't see how one can say the statement is socially constructed in the same way one would say, fashion and cuisine are socially constructed. I would say this is a mind independent fact which we discovered.
Okay, okay, all right. I think I understand.
Right.
Okay, so let me
Hmm.
let me see if I can repeat what I think you think, and you can tell me if
Hmm.
you think I'm accurately representing your ideas. Hold on,
Sure.
but first I need to
Yeah.
take a drink of water because my mouth is really dry. Mm. All right, so you're seeing when you say science, you actually kind of mean a three-step process. The first is the
Uh,
people. Well, I'll just wait. Let's see if because
sure.
right
Yeah.
because I'm basing this off of what
Yeah.
you just said. So on the one hand, starting at the beginning, you have people who are engaging in a scientific process of inquiry, and that's one step of it. The second step is they identify, let's say, distance to the moon, and they measure that distance in order to get an accurate estimate of the external reality. That's step two. Step three is sort of writing that fact down and having it published and accepted by the scientific community and it established as a scientific fact that this is the distance from the Earth to the moon. Is that accurate?
True, but I wouldn't tie myself to the three-step process. I mean, in this aspect, probably I would agree with the Austrian philosopher Feyerabend, Paul Feyerabend. I mean, people sometimes classify him as a postmodernist, but he says there isn't one particular method that you find to follow, that you have for science. And if you give me a method, he challenges, saying that I can always find a theory which is well accepted, but which didn't follow these 3 or 4 steps or whatever. So yeah, in this particular aspect, I agree with your 3 steps.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'm going to try to explain how I see that from
Hmm.
my point of view, and you can tell me where you think the social constructionism ends in that process. That you
Yeah.
like, just not all processes, just this process. So,
Yeah.
one, the scientists collaborating together, building tech, all of that stuff, adhering to the scientific method, is all social. It's all socially enacted. It's all part of the things that they're doing. They're using things that are socially constructed, right? Not the technology itself,
Hmm.
but the ideas behind it. Blah blah blah. And then they go to the measurement, right? And we use names like moon and sun to designate objects. Those don't come from nature, those come from us. And then we have a distance that we can organize in miles, we can organize in kilometers, we can organize in feet if we want to. It's useful, useful concepts of distance that we've arbitrarily developed in order for us to be able to accurately measure distances. But there's no inherent meter, there's no inherent foot. Right? So that's the layer of social constructionism on top of the physical act of observing the world that's going on. And then scientists make evaluations in our minds. We process this information and establish a fact that the distance between the Earth and the Sun, or whatever it is this distance. And that fact carries a kind of weight in society that makes it more, it has a gravitas than an opinion about the moon being made of cheese. So for me, even though the physical world is external and independent of mind, and that distance is independent of mind, every step along the way involves human brains, human beings talking and agreeing things. And that is why it's socially constructed. It's because it's people doing it all the time. So, at what point in that three step thing do you think social constructionism ends?
So I would say just the fact that we give names like moon and the sun to these heavenly bodies, and the fact that we use miles and kilometers, and we can switch them if we like. all that. It's just that part that is socially constructed. I don't think the values that go with scientific research, that's not socially constructed.
Okay, can
I
you
think those
explain?
values
Yeah,
there.
where do you think values come from if they're not socially constructed?
Well, if you press me, I'll have to say, well, they come from the same place where logical truths and mathematical truths come
Which is
from the abstract realm. From the abstract realm. Uh,
okay. And
that's not
how do we
spatio-temporal.
access that? I don't. If it's abstract.
Yeah, so yes, exactly. Platonism has its problems. I agree with that. It's not that I have a fully solved,
Oh, are
complete
you kind
model
of
of
like
how that happens,
you're a
but
fan of the forms?
yes, to a certain extent, yeah.
Okay, okay, all right. I was
Yeah.
wondering if this was ever going to go in the God direction, and it hadn't so far enough, so I was a little confused. But now that I know that you're like into the to forms, now a lot of things are making sense. Okay, all
Okay.
right.
Mhm. Right. So that's what I would say, right? The values and the mathematical truths and the logical truths and all of them, they come from there, and I have no idea how we are able to apprehend them, right? So I make the claim that they are outside space and time, that they don't occupy our realm at all, and which is the third point of the conclusion there, which I said, right? That's the central idea, and I said it seems like we're always reaching out to some external standards that we somehow know to be true, but we didn't invent or construct.
Mm.
In my slide number 9, that's what I think
Okay.
it is.
Okay. So I think this, I'm going to say, I'm going to just like, I'm not going to ramble, but I'm just going to segue into the next thing, which is we're going to talk about, we're going to get
Sure.
demonetized if we say the word rape, but we already said it, so it's fine. It doesn't even matter. I don't care if this is monetized. So we'll just use the term. But when it comes to things that, so I think here's where the gap is. Like I'm walking with you the whole way until we get to there's a realm of forms that have these idealized values and other things going on in it, which exist outside of time and space and is purely abstract, but also we can access this, but we can't. So I think that's, you don't have to like address that. I'm just going to say that that's kind of where I'm falling down.
Mhm.
And
Sure. Yeah.
part of the reason for that is we're gonna take not mathematics because we're already at like 5 to 9. So I'm trying to wrap this up in like the next 15 minutes because we could go
Sure.
forever.
Yeah.
But this has been so nice, by the way, and
Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed it. I really,
Oh,
really
same
enjoyed
here.
our
Yeah. Thank you
conversation.
so much.
So, rape is morally wrong. Now, I'm not disagreeing with the statement. I absolutely agree with the statement. I think where we're going to disagree is where do we get the values underpinning that statement? And I think, especially in the case of rape, if you picked this, not me. So, but here's the problem that I see with. We're going to take the example of rape. I don't. What I see in the world doesn't give me empirical grounds to conclude that everybody knows rape is wrong. And here's why. One, rape exists in nature and can be a successful reproductive strategy. I think lions, of some certain breeds of chimpanzees. I'm reading the evolutionary theory of patriarchy right now. And one of the things is
Right.
about male coercion and how males will kill
Mhm.
the offspring of another male. And then shortly
Yeah.
thereafter, the female goes into estrus. That's
Mhm.
messed up. That is so.
Well, see,
Right, wait, wait,
right there,
okay.
right there. When you
Right, okay,
right there, when
right,
you said
wait,
messed up,
right.
that's
But
what I'm talking about.
but I'm not getting that value from nature. Nature tells me it's a successful reproductive strategy. Two, when we see rape legislated, now I'm going to have to draw on my Western like bubble here. But for instance, rape in the Bible is only criminalized for girls and women. Boys, according to monotheism for centuries, couldn't be raped. And so you had thousands of years of men and boys who were sexually assaulted, who were not seen in their own religions as victims of rape because of their gender. And then there's the other problem that in the law, there's like a real invisibility of male sexual assault just generally in Western society. But marital rape was legal In fact, in a lot of places around the world, it's still legal. I think the last state in the United States to outlaw marital rape was North Carolina in 1993. Now, if we are supposed to be able to access an abstract universal truth that provides us with the values, that science of transparency and reproducibility, how can we not have more societies that have dealt with rape in a more moral way? It's only because of feminism. It's because of women speaking up and speaking out that we even talk about male rape victims these days, that we talk about domestic abuse. Where are the values of those parts of society? Science can be manifest through the abstract realms of the forms, but not don't rape your wife. So, and here I'm not really being rational, okay? I'm not actually getting quite emotional. So, you can take that into consideration. But I just don't see the case that claiming rape is morally wrong has ever had any impact in the real world, other than when people stand up and say it. Yeah, I just dumped a lot on you, but what is your response?
Well, I think I I included a line in the in, well, probably not in the slide, but I think I said it. I said somewhere that whether or not we act in accordance with this principle is not the point, right? The point is that the principle isn't a social construct, and that's written in stone. The principle itself is written in stone. Whether we see, that's the difference between physical laws and moral laws, right? I mean, if I'm dropped from the 10th floor, again, this is going back to C.S. Lewis, right? If I'm dropped from the 10th floor, I don't have a choice whether to fall or not. I mean, the laws of physics I'll have to obey, whether I like it or not. But when it comes to moral principles and even principles of reason and logic, we do have a choice. We can disobey them, but that doesn't make them any less real.
Yeah, the thing is, it just seems to me like as a quantitative person, right? If you have an independent variable impacting on your subject, then it should impact it the same way. Otherwise, it's not, replicable. It's not repeatable. You're missing something there. So again, I think you're claiming not to be able to know how to know there are more. You don't know how you get moral values, but you
Yes,
claim
yeah,
they
that's true.
exist, right? And
Yeah.
I wonder if
Mhm.
in your model of the influence of culture and society, modernity, whatever, and the influence of the abstract realm of the forms, what percentage of the your values do you think are explained by the variables in the forms part of the variables in your model, and how much is explained by society, religion, exposure to other ideas, or whatever else? I mean, do you have a role for social norms instilling these values rather than like just them being brought
Are
in
you are
magically?
you asking me? Are you asking me personally, or
Yeah, yeah. When we're asking about what we think, right? We're just bullshitting about what our opinions are on this subject, and I want to just like get a little bit deeper and ask, why do you think that? So yeah, because obviously you grew up in a society, has certain values, you were taught certain morals. What percentage of your values come from the forms? I'm using that as a shorthand, not dismissively.
sure? Yeah, yeah. But like I said, it's not that every single moral rule is written out there in the forms. So I would say that the very basic moral principles, obviously around, I think about 80% comes from the forms, and probably 10 to 20% probably from the society. At least for me personally,
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
I still don't. I'm not sure. I would if this was a paper you were presenting, I would be like, how are you getting your information on what percentages? So again, it's just that
Oh
we're
yeah,
gonna
no,
differ. We're
I just
gonna
put a
yeah
number because you had
yeah
asked me for a
yeah
number,
yes
right?
yeah. Um,
Right,
but yes. So okay.
right.
Yeah. Well, I think we're actually like at the top of the hour. I'll just look through. I did pull up. That's why I was delayed in advancing your slide one time because I was looking at the chat. If people have questions, I know this is going to lag a little bit, but we can you stick around for maybe 2 or 3 more minutes? Maybe you can do, I don't know if you want to do a closing statement. I probably won't. I talk about this stuff on my channel all the time, but if you have any, because I don't, you can have the last word is what I'm saying while we wait to see if people in the chat have any questions or comments.
I didn't really prepare a
Oh yeah,
closing
yeah, yeah,
statement, but
yeah.
I
I'm
guess closing. Yeah,
no pressure. If you don't, that's fine. I just wanted to give people time. So
sure.
Okay, so then I'll start just at the top of the comments. We've got Scribby in the chat, Alex is in the chat, Vidya, and Andrew, I see have posted so far. So, Scribby writes, epistemic and humanical injustice is important as well. Miranda Fricker's work, very valuable. Oh, thank you. Is this along the lines of Lisa Feldman's Barrett's ideas on how emotions are made? That is also from Scribby. And two more from Scribby. Is this similar to Donald Davidson's triangulation? Wow, Scribby, you're like, you should come on and talk with us. Who are these people? I haven't read. Have you read any of those people? I feel like a.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, I really, when people say, have you read this person? Like, chances are probably not. And then I always feel bad. But let's see. Alex writes, what does mind independent mean? Because I think that on some level, they are objective, but nothing that isn't a mind will ever arrive at them. Okay. And Alex goes on to write, human life is valuable is definitely not a thing in nature, though. Human life is valuable to humans. It's not, quote unquote, true that it's valuable. And then Vidya writes, mind independent means independent of human mind. That's a very, very helpful comment in the chat. Thank you. Alex writes, I think mathematical statements are objectively true because they are true by definition. Yeah, we didn't get into rationalism, but yeah, I see where you're going with this, Alex. Like saying 2 + 2 = 4, it's by definition true. I don't know if that's quote unquote true in nature. Then Andrew writes, why would we have a spectrometer if we didn't know about light? Okay. And also, we think thoughts and language. Language is a social construct. And then the final comment was from Scribney, who wrote, phenomenon are the appearances which constitute our experience. Noumena are the presumable things in themselves which can constitute reality. Yes, I didn't mention the noumenal and the phenomenal and Kant. And we didn't get to Hume's is-ought distinction either, but I think we did promise, I did say about an hour. But maybe after this, we can, if you want to come back on and chat some more, or if there's a point that we didn't get into today, you would definitely be welcome back on the channel, because I, for one, had a blast. I really, really enjoyed our
I did too.
Yeah.
I did too.
And I
So
feel
the thing
like,
is, I've been reading quite a lot about, people saying things in social concept. This is the first time that I've actually spoken to a person who believes that.
oh,
So
okay.
it was very good to,
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
you explain why you think what you think. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it was, and what, like I said, once you mentioned Plato, everything like went into place, and so that was, yeah, really, really helpful. I'm glad we got there in the end, and I'm glad we both didn't appeal to God, because then it would have gotten really like complicated.
Well, yeah, we could do that too, but
Yeah.
yeah, I would probably appeal to God for the physical stuff that we have, right?
Yeah.
The
Okay.
religion stuff, the universe, and other things. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's a different story.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that what it looks like, as I said before, is that when you talk about all the steps that we're taking, the way that we interact with the world, the scientific process, you and I are in concurrence on all of the things that happen. We just have different lines as to how much of that is socially constructed. And again, I'm not saying that everything is mind dependent. I think that there's an external reality. Like I said, I just think that we're not describing it, we're describing our model of it that we experience in our minds, which is a part of it, but it's not objective reality, which is beyond our ken. So I guess I ended up getting the last word, but the host usually does, because they're the ones who end the show. But yes, please, anytime if you want to pick up another topic or whatever else, come on, and I'll give you a chance to say good. Oh, is there anything you want to plug? Do you have anything you want to plug, or even just a channel, someone else that you like and watch that you want to shout out before we go?
No, not really. No.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well then, everyone, I have been Kristi. John has been awesome. You've been awesome. Thank you for your time and attention with us today. And if you want, you can come by tomorrow. I will be reading the section from Barbara Smuts, The Evolutionary Theory of an evolutionary theory of patriarchy, or something like that. We're reading the section on female resistance to male coercion. And so if you're nerdy enough to be interested by that, you can come by tomorrow or check me out later. So it's going to be goodbye from me and goodbye from John. Oh, wait, I have to get on the
Goodbye,
part.
everyone.
Yes, hold on, wait, you're too fast, because I have to
Yeah.
actually get to the bit of the tab where it has it, except it's got your thing on it. Oh, how awkward. Oh no, I had it so well done. Leave. Okay, there we go. Get out. Get out. This is terrible. I can't seem to get out of your. Oh, there we go. Finally, let's try that one more time like it didn't happen. All right, so thank you, everyone. It's goodbye from me and goodbye from John. Say goodbye, John.
All right, goodbye, everyone, and thank you, Kristi. Thanks for hosting me. I
Yeah.
had a really good time.
Bye.
Bye bye.
All right, so we are off air. Yeah.
Oh,